episode of the Alter Your Health podcast, your source of information and inspiration to promote the holistic transformation of your health and the health of our planet. I'm your host, Dr. Benjamin Alter, and today's guest, we have another Benjamin. This Benjamin is Benjamin Fox, who is a licensed massage therapist and practicing professional astrologer. In 2012, he and his wife, Lori Dakar, founded a new possibility with a mission to provide education and training that affirms the alchemical underpinnings of various healing traditions, including Chinese medicine and astrology, as the foundation of transformation process. As a co-facilitator of the alchemical healing mentorship, Benjamin supports individuals in discovering their purpose and living their destiny to the fullest. Presently, Benjamin is particularly interested in a conversation that explores the necessary connection between personal healing and cultural change. So today's conversation was wonderful and insightful for me personally. Benjamin and I have known each other for 5 or 6 years now, and he's been my personal astrologer a couple of times, and working with him has always led to such incredible awareness and insights into my life, into my place on this planet. Thought it would be a great time to have a conversation with him regarding astrology and the place that astrology has in the field, in the space of health and healing. And I think we concluded that astrology offers a really great leverage, a really great tool to promote health and healing on so many levels for so many reasons. So we're going to dive into that conversation. And without further ado, here we go with Benjamin Fox. All right, here we are with Benjamin Fox. Welcome to the Alter Your Health podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Glad to be here, Ben.
Yeah, Benjamin and I go back a few years now, and we met at Esalen, and I just felt called to share, if it's okay with you, Benjamin, share just the brief story of our meeting, because I find it to this day just such a kind of profound synchronicity in my life.
Right.
And
it was a really good one.
Yeah. So I was at, I think it was 2013 or 2013, I think.
I think it was 13.
Yeah. And I was at Esalen studying yoga. I was in a yoga teacher training, and my yoga teacher training month was wrapping up, and I was in the hot tubs enjoying my last few hours at Esalen. And I come across Benjamin. I think you were just starting a workshop that you and Lori were going to be teaching, if I remember correctly. And anyways, we connected in the hot tub and just kind of started chatting, and you pointed me in the direction of Lori's book that she had published. Why it's mistaken me now, the title, Five Spirits.
Five Spirits.
Yeah, Five Spirits. Kind of like a textbook of sorts for Chinese medicine.
Alchemical acupuncture for psychological and spiritual healing is the subtitle.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I was like, wow, that sounds like an interesting book. And I kind of like, okay, sure, I'll check it out. You know, I feel like we all get recommended books, I mean, so often every day. And I left that meeting like...
And you were heading off to begin studies in Oregon, in Portland.
Soon after. So I was definitely like, oh, do I want to study Chinese medicine in addition to naturopathic medicine? This is really an auspicious kind of meeting. It felt like really special. And sure enough, I left the very next day and I went down to Los Angeles, where I was still living. And I met up with a friend of mine who literally had a copy of that book and put it in my hands.
Right.
Like, hey, I just finished this book. I think you should read it. And I said, this is like far out, like, crazy land.
Right.
I was just sitting in the hot tub with Benjamin, Lori, the author's husband.
Exactly.
And I
Yeah.
was just recommended this book. So anyways,
Yeah.
the stars were aligned in that moment.
They
And,
were indeed.
and,
Yeah. Yeah. And
and
then you came back to Esalen and assisted us another year with our workshop
yeah,
there.
yeah.
So
So that just started, our relationship started then and there. And I just, from that moment, felt really connected with you and your work, and also Lori. And I mean, I felt like all the universes keeps on nudging me towards you.
yeah. And so here
Yeah.
we are.
So
Yeah.
here we
Yeah.
are.
It's a great story, Ben. It's
Yeah.
really a great story. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So now focusing on you, Benjamin, how you, and I know you have a background in massage as well
Yeah.
as astrology, of course, which that's what our conversation is more focused on today. So
Right.
how did you come from massage and then into astrology?
Well, actually, astrology predates massage for me. I
Okay.
started, was first introduced to astrology when I was 25 years old. And I've been licensed in massage since like for the last 18 years. So yeah, I was 25. I was living in New York City at the time. I was working at a health food restaurant called Whole Wheat and Wild Berries. And the owner, Virginia Bell, she was an astrologer. She is actually now a full-time professional astrologer, but at that time she was running a restaurant in the West Village. And there were a bunch of young kids working there. And she used to print our charts up. And she was always asking us questions about our lives and looking at our charts. And I got very interested in the charts that she had. I wanted to be able to read them. So another synchronicity, I decided I was going to learn astrology. She introduced me to the first teacher, Stephen Forrest, who I started studying with. She gave me his book, The Inner Sky. And that afternoon, or that next day, I was living at the time on the East Side. I went to the local health food store, and there was a flyer up for an introduction to astrology class right after I decided I was going to learn it. And so sure, I signed up. And so since I was 25, I'm 53 now. So, 28 years, I've been immersed in astrology. Yeah, that's how
Wow.
it started.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I feel like synchronicity really has been a theme in a number of past conversations, and with the last guest on the podcast as well. It seems like we are constantly being nudged and guided along by the universe. And if we're open and receptive to these ever-present messages, we can follow along and stay in the flow. And it sounds like that's exactly what you've done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think synchronicities are the way that the cosmos talk to us. Yeah.
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 S- So, yeah, it's really interesting. Do you feel, I guess, on the note of synchronicity, do you feel like you are ever like looking for signs from the universe, or like actively asking for guidance? Or is it just, do you feel like you rather just stay in a state of openness?
Um, that's a good question, Ben. I think it's a little bit of both for me, I think it's kind of an orientation in my life that I'm working with astrology all the time, and
Mm.
I'm watching the movement of the planets in relationship to my own chart and the charts of so many other people, that I think I'm always, I have an orientation to tuning into the cosmic energies, tuning into what the planets are up to and what they might be asking of me at any given time in my life,
Mhm.
because I relate to them that way. They're like beings. And so, yeah, I try to stay open to their messages, and I consult them at the same time. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's a combination of both.
It's more of a
Yeah,
relationship. It's a relationship.
that is a key word. It's
Yeah.
totally a relationship. Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah.
Love it. Is there anything else worth saying about the massage, your work as a massage therapist?
Yeah, I mean, I love body work. It's winding down for me, truthfully. I've done it for 18 years. I still have some clients that I work with, but astrology, I think I can say pretty confidently, is my real passion. You know, I'm fascinated by people and what makes them who they are and what makes them tick. And astrology is a system that really helps me to understand people, and I love supporting people and understanding themselves by using it.
Mhm.
So I'm doing more and more work with astrology, less and less with massage. um, I haven't found a really useful and creative way of combining the two. so
Yeah, I
so yeah,
remember it was
but
a massage therapist friend of mine told me once that a lot of people relate to the world of massage as like a professional sport. You know, you can't do it for your whole life because it's, I think,
right,
energetically and physically such a demanding practice, you know, being,
it's pretty physically demanding. Yeah,
yeah,
it is, which I've loved about it,
yeah,
actually.
yeah,
But now that I'm in my 50s, I think about like developing work that I can do well into my later years, and
yeah.
probably massage I'm not going to do. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and well, I know firsthand your skills as an astrologer. We've had a couple of sessions that have been really, you know, profound and
Yeah.
enlightening, and that's, you know, that's where we're going to get into. So I'd love to, the first question that I've got for you is like how you talk about astrology to someone who's maybe like a non-believer or skeptic, because I mean, I think it's like, you know, the epitome of woo woo in a lot of, for a lot of people, like, you know.
Yeah, for a lot of people it is.
Yeah.
And I think I think we astrologers have had something to do with giving astrology a bad name. I think astrology sun sign columns um, are really horrendous in a certain way. They can be fun. Um, and also I've heard from so many people who come to me for sessions say, well, I saw an astrologer 15 years ago and they looked at my chart and said, you know, you're never going to have children. And that's, to me, just really irresponsible practice, you know, of
Mm.
astrology. But fortunately, I mean, at this point, I used to really want to, I used to feel like I had to be able to convince skeptics of the validity of astrology. And fortunately, I don't feel that way anymore. You know, I think that came out of my own insecurities around my belief in astrology. And I'm a skeptic myself, you know, like for so many years, I was engaged with astrology, but I was born with sun and moon in the sign Aquarius. And one of the things about Aquarians is they really, really have to know the truth for themselves. You know, they like to question authority. And so I questioned it, you know, even as I was practicing it, I felt like, how can this work? You know, how can astrology work? But it does work. And, you know, so how would I explain it to somebody who's skeptical or somebody who just wants to know what astrology is? I think astronomy, which it's often confused with, which is a science,
Mhm.
you know, it measures the movement of celestial bodies. And astrology assigns meaning to the movement of those celestial bodies with regard to human life.
Mhm.
So they're moving in space. It isn't just random. And it has meaning in terms of, you know, there's a connection between us and the cosmos. And I think that way of thinking about astrology, it isn't rational, you know, it isn't rational. I found a quote thinking about that we were going to be doing this interview, I saw a quote last week and I wrote it down. I've got it here. It's by W.B. Yeats. And he said, people who lean on logic and philosophy and rational exposition end by starving the best part of the mind. And, astrology requires a certain thinking function, but it also requires intuition. And the word you used, it's really about a relationship. It's a relationship between me, my client, and the chart, the symbols in the chart. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I do have a question. Like, do you know the history very well of astrology, how it came to be what it is, and how long it's been what it is?
Yeah, I think I don't like, I'm not a historian, an
Yeah.
astrological historian, but I have
Hmm.
some pieces of information. I think astrology has been around for as long as human beings have been looking at the sky,
Yeah,
really.
that's what I really would guess. I would guess
Yeah.
that it started by, humans looking at the sky and kind of measuring patterns and yeah, just being
Yeah,
observant.
and I think
Yeah.
when human beings really began to settle down in one place and could watch the cycles of the planets, watch the cycles of the moon, watch the constellations move through the sky from a given standpoint on a nightly basis, and then beginning to give meaning. I think it was used a lot. I mean, the Babylonians certainly developed astrology. Egyptians, there's history. The Greeks and the Romans developed it further. And I think people used it a lot in terms of like rulership and kings, and when was a fortuitous time to, it had a lot to do with power. And in more recent times, it's been used more to look at the psychology of a person's life. As psychology was developed in the West, there's lots of overlap between, Jung wasn't, he worked with astrology. I don't think he was particularly out in the open about it, but it's known that he was actively involved in astrology. So yeah, so that gets at a little bit of it.
Yeah. And one of my friends from school who was studying Chinese medicine, she said something, she told me, I don't know if the validity of this, but she told me that there's some um, ancient Chinese text that says something along the lines that like the true healer understands the astrology of their patient or something along those, maybe not using astrology, of course, but the true healer understands like the patient, where the patient fits in the universe and with the, the stars in the sky. And that, that got me
Right.
thinking like,
I'm
yeah,
sure,
yeah.
you know,
Hmm.
yeah,
Cool. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So I also really like the fact, you came out saying like you really don't give that much, you don't really care what the skeptics or non-believers say, because it sounds like you've kind of over the years cultivated the confidence and trust in what you're doing. And yeah, can you speak a
yeah.
little bit more to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big deal for me because when I was in my 20s, I would say even my 30s, and this is, you could see that, any trained astrologer could see this in my chart. I was, I was a bit self-righteous about what I knew, and wanted to be able to prove that what I knew was the truth. And I've learned over the years that it's not a particularly useful position to take in relationship to people. I've been humbled by life somewhat. And I think there's a responsibility to knowing things, of course. And the chart gives us insight into people. But I'm more interested now in approaching it and this is directly related to symbols in my chart, in cultivating a kind of curiosity about how people are relating to their own chart, like how they are actualizing the chart. So the work I do now, it's not so geared towards telling people who they are because of what I see in the chart, but more about exploring and dialoguing and being in relationship with people around how they might come into a fuller relationship with their chart.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's really hard to change somebody's belief system if they don't want to change it. You know, if it's working for them, you know, why try to change it?
Totally. I think I'm always working to let go of changing other people's belief systems.
It's really hard
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
especially when you can see patterns in people's lives that, you know, that you feel aren't working
Mm-hmm.
necessarily so well. And I'm sure you run into this in your work
Yeah.
a lot, you know.
Yeah. I often think like, you know, I often consider like an outside or elevated perspective on, you know, various situations. And the fact of the matter is it's really difficult to cultivate an elevated perspective in when we have blind spots, I guess you could say.
We have blind spots, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think even the best of us have blind spots, and we just have to acknowledge that, you know, our own blind spots are present, and other people might have blind spots, but it's not the blind spots don't become illuminated from an outside in approach. It's kind of you know, each person is responsible for opening their eyes and, you know, shifting their perspective themselves. There's only
right.
so much you can do to shake someone awake.
There's only so much to do. And the Greeks had this great word. I love this word. It's Kairos. I don't know if you've ever heard that word, Ben.
Yeah.
Kairos. And Kairos refers to that everything has its own right timing, you know.
Yeah.
And from an astrological perspective, you know, from the moment of a person's birth, we can look at the chart and we can track the movement of the planets throughout that person's lifetime. You know, we call that transits, progressions, ways of looking at how the movement of the planets is going to impact and unfold the natal birth chart. And that movement gives us insight into when that Kairos may come to fruition. You know, when is the timing for a certain event in a person's life? Even given that, though, I think, you know, and this is a strong belief of mine, and one of the things that skeptics often want to argue about is that, you know, they argue that astrology is disempowering because it says, you know, our lives are fated and we have no control, no free will. But of course, you know, coming to consciousness is something that requires our engagement, you know. And so I see it as, again, a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have to relate to the energies that are moving through us, and we have to exercise free will and make choices that lead to kind of evolution in our life.
Yeah, no, I definitely want to get into some of these more, um, you know, different concepts, because I think that's a good point that I don't think about much, but a lot of people consider that, you know, this like predestiny or predetermined fate, it's all in the stars, and we are powerless here on earth. and
Right.
and
So,
you know, I think that that's kind of ridiculous. Like it is a relationship, and the way that we act meets the way that the stars are, and then that's what we see and get, you know.
right. And then how do we relate to those energies in
Yeah.
ourselves, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
moving along to another question, just kind of to
Sure.
open up into astrology a little bit more. What are some important things to know for like a novice or someone untrained in astrology, like about a chart? Because you mentioned more about this, the sun sign column in the newspaper.
Right.
Beyond that, what should we be aware of?
Well, if you want to work with your own chart, say, if a person wanted to work with their own chart and try to get some insight into themselves through the chart, the things you need to know, the most basic things you need to know are you have to actually use your thinking mind to memorize the symbols. That's a good place to start. So there are symbols for all of the planets. And in astrology, we think of the sun and the moon, we call them planets. So so there's the planets, and the planets, are you interested in like kind of what you need to know about the planets, or just that you need to know the planets?
I don't know. I think to break people, I think like going back to the skeptics and non-believers, I think that they probably, most of those people probably only know kind of the sun sign column, fortune
Right.
teller sort of stuff.
Right.
So
Right.
what might
Yeah.
someone
Okay.
know to like, oh, like there's more to this?
Right. And what people
Yeah.
will often say is, I'm a Cancer, and all the things that people say about cancers, they don't fit me. So obviously astrology doesn't work.
Right. Things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Cancer, if you say I'm a Cancer, that means the sun was in the sign Cancer when you were born. At that same moment in time, the moon was in a particular sign of the zodiac, as was Mercury, as was Venus, as was Mars, right on out to Pluto. All of the planets were in a particular sign.
Mm-hmm.
And those, that entire configuration is really what we're looking at when you look at a chart. You're not just looking at the sun. And it's possible, like the sun is a symbol in the chart for our core identity. Ultimately we'd want to support a person in their life, hopefully shows some expression that's resonant with their sun.
Mm-hmm.
But all of the planets are represented, and all of the planets kind of vie for some airtime in our life, in the biography of our life. And so you're looking at each planet, you're looking at what sign is that planet in, and you could think of the planets as like characters in the story of your life, so the sun is talking about your identity. The moon is talking more about your emotions, your feeling life. Mercury is talking about your mind and how your mind works and how you perceive the world. Each of those characters has a role to play in the chart. And then the sign that they're in describes a lot of things. It describes certain inherent qualities that planet has. It describes certain resources that it can draw on in order to play its role in our life. It also describes a kind of evolutionary intention for that planet. Each sign has built into it an evolutionary intention. Little sections, and each planet in a particular sign falls into one of the 12 houses. And those houses refer to areas of life where the action of our life takes place. So there's a house that has to do with career, there's a house that has to do with family, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And this is a lot, but the one last piece of it is they're called aspects in astrology, and aspects describe the relationships between the planets within the 360 degrees of the circle. So there's geometric relationships that have significance. If two planets are, say, 90 degrees apart or 180 degrees apart in the circle, that has significance. Mm-hmm. So those are the four things: planets, signs, houses, aspects. Those are the basic building blocks of the vocabulary. Yeah.
Yeah, no, these are things that I'm, at this point all pretty familiar with. And
Yeah.
there's no doubt that, it's complicated. Like it's all the interplay of it all. It takes some familiar, you got to become familiar with it. And
Yeah, and you have to learn the associations,
Mhm.
like there's some just rote memorization in the early stages of trying to learn astrology, but there's endless books on those associations.
Mhm.
What does it mean to be Gemini? What is it? How does Gemini relate to the world? And how does that differ from, say, how Sagittarius relates to the world? There's a whole orientation to life that is defined and described by these energetics. And
Mhm.
initially in the early stages, you've got to kind of learn that, and then
Yeah.
the fun begins.
Yeah, no, I think a lot. And it's funny because when I was in school, I often trying to kind of naturally drew correlations with homeopathy, which,
Hmm.
there's thousands of
Right,
thousands of homeopathic remedies to know and to
right,
study. And once you do have that foundational knowledge, that which is rote memorization and kind of just books, then you can kind of start to piece things together. But there's
right. And then you start, when you steep yourself in that, you start seeing people and you say, oh, there's a
yeah,
pulsatilla type, or
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, things like that.
yeah,
Yeah. So, back to the, understand, given the complex nature of astrology and all of these different elements that need to be well understood, back to like the lay person
yeah.
to, is there any aspects in the chart, beyond the sun and moon, maybe that like someone should understand better just to get a better grasp of themselves, or is that a different answer to any person?
um i think I think it's always good to start with the sun. you
Yeah.
know it's like, get a good handle on the sun. you know so what does that mean? It means, what sign is the sun in? First, just understand what the sun represents. Like, what is the sun as a planetary body? What does it represent? And then understand what sign it's in. What house is it in? And are there any other planets in the chart that make an aspect to the sun, that are in relationship to the sun? Because again, the sun, just like it is in the solar system, it's the kind of organizing principle of the solar system. And it provides warmth. It allows things to grow. And in order for us to really relate to our chart in a conscious way, we kind of have to be able to understand what our sun is asking of us in this life.
Hmm.
And so I think starting with the sun is always a good place.
Hmm.
Sign, house, aspects, and then I'd go to the moon. That's what I tell people. Get one planet under your belt, understand it really well, and then turn your attention to another one. Like, probably the moon would be the next planet you might. But if someone were really interested in Mars, for instance, there's no harm in starting with Mars, and
Hmm.
looking at the Mars in your chart. What sign is it in?
Yeah.
So on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So what I'm hearing you say is like, knowing the sun, sun in Gemini or whatever, but beyond that, knowing the house that it's in, and also knowing any relationships with any signs, like in a square or like 90 degree or 180 degree.
Yes,
See,
because
yeah, that,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, because the sign is going to tell you, it's going to give you information about your purpose here. Like, what did you come here to become, to learn,
Mhm.
to offer, through your life? It gives you all kinds of information by sign. Any planet that is in aspect to that sun is going to play a role. You know, it's going to play a role in terms of shaping your identity. That planet itself and all the information it provides is going to it's going to become an integral part of your identity. You know, you can't, a planet in aspect to the sun has to have some say in terms of its how it shows up in your life. It's so much easier when you look at an actual chart and you're dealing with somebody's life. So I don't know.
Yeah, it
Might
all
be,
kind of
yeah,
fits together. Yeah,
yeah,
I think that's, you know, good enough for where we're at just in the
yeah,
in
yeah.
this phase. But I feel like that's a good segue to really why I wanted to talk to you more about this. And, you know, and that is the role of astrology when it comes to like health and well-being and realizing, you know, maybe one's potential in life and, you know, in support of their growth
Right.
and evolution into that. So like,
Yeah.
and that's, you know, I don't have that much experience from a client end with astrology, but in working with you, I know that that's really your focus of, you know, kind of using this really as a lever to boost someone into a more kind of realized, healthy version of themselves.
Yeah. I would say that it
Yeah.
is strongly my orientation. You know, I believe, and I guess I've gotten to the point where I just try to be really explicit about this because everybody's spiritual belief systems are different. But
Mhm.
I believe that we are born and each of us has a certain mandate, you know, a certain destiny that we incarnate in order to realize. That's my belief, you know. And people disagree with that. People have different beliefs, but for me, it's just, it works for me. You know, it makes it interesting to get up in the morning and face each day feeling like I have a mandate. You know, I'm here for a reason.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like the chart, what I believe is that the chart is the blueprint. It's the map in a sense. It's, you know, it's a kind of encoded map. You have to kind of decipher the symbols,
Hmm.
but it's a map for that destiny. And it describes it, and it's very particular to each individual. And it is complex, you know, there's many layers to it and there's many facets to it. But it's, and I don't know if we ever live into the absolute fullest expression of our entire chart, but I sort of feel like we can set a goal for ourselves to realize as much of it as we're capable of,
Hmm.
you know, like, um, so yeah, I think, and for me, I feel like if our life is in alignment with the particular energetics represented in the chart, like if we make decisions and if the choices we make and the actions we take are in alignment and resonant with the energies in the birth chart, what I see in the clients I work with is they tend to realize more happiness, more fulfillment. They're more vital, you know, their life has a sense of purpose to it. It's like they feel like they're here for a reason. And that to me, you know, that to me makes you feel like healthy. You know, that feels like health to me. I mean, there's lots
For
of
sure.
other things that go into being healthy, but that for me is at the core, that
Absolutely. Yeah.
your life has purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think I just said it in the last episode that, you know, we talk about, you know, eating well and drinking clean water and breathing fresh air and exercising and all these kind of physical health, you know, practices. But
Yeah.
in actuality, if that core purpose is not, if you're not, if someone's not connecting with that core purpose for existing, then all of these things will be chores, you know, eating,
Exactly.
exercise
Yeah.
will be chores. And if we can connect with the core purpose, then of course we're going to be nourishing ourselves physically in all of the ways that allow us to maintain the connection with that core purpose. So
Yeah. And
yeah.
I think it works in both directions, Ben, because I
Mhm.
think, for me, I feel like everything started for me in terms of my, let me call it waking up, when I changed how I was eating.
Mhm.
At 20 years old, I was sick. I was physically ill a lot. And a friend said, come meet this guy who runs a health food store. And it was just completely new information to me. I just didn't know. So, but it made sense to me. So I immediately changed how I was eating.
Mhm.
And I do think, when you speak of health, I think food is a really good place to start. What we put in our bodies
Yeah,
shapes who we become.
for sure.
Literally builds our cells. So I think there's a massive connection between what you say is like those foundation, like diet, exercise, movement, clean air. It's difficult to become conscious about your life purpose if you're eating at McDonald's every day.
Mhm.
The food itself is kind of deadening, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's a really good
I don't
point.
know
It's
that it's
kind of,
impossible to wake up if you're eating at McDonald's every day, but
yeah.
it maybe makes it more challenging.
Yeah, sometimes I think about there's this kind of, I like to imagine, there's a source of energy, some universal source of energy that kind of gives us life. And if we are like wasting energy on metabolism of junk food, for example, then we don't have as much of that energy to go into all of the other things that our being
Mm,
is trying to access in this life. So so yeah, that's a really
right,
good point. It kind of goes both
right.
ways. Yeah. Um
That's a nice, I like that way of looking at it.
mhm. So
Yeah.
how um let's see, how do I want to phrase this? Like what what is the, if the chart, if awareness of one's astrological chart is a tool for kind of to access like the purpose, then is it as easy as simply looking at the chart and like reading an explanation, or having a session with you or another like astrologer who's trained in this? Like what is it, just that
Yeah.
easy?
I
I don't know if I'm
wish it were
asking.
that easy.
Yeah.
I wish it were that easy.
Yeah.
Um, no, I think often what I hear from people when I do a session with them, what the thing I most hear is like, first, people are like, wow, how can you know these things about me from just looking at that chart? Um, very personal things. How can you know that about me? But then the thing that people most say is, um, this has been so incredibly affirming of who I know myself to be. That's what a lot of people will say. And I think that's one of the gifts that astrology really can offer us. It can be very affirming because for whatever reasons, like we might know who we're supposed to be, but the work of becoming, and finding the courage to be who we are in a really full way, that can take a lifetime. That can take years. There's all kinds of conditions, environmental conditions, from our families, ways in which we get wounded when we're young that impinge on our ability to live into our destiny. And so I think that the chart, what it offers is, it offers the blueprint, it offers this is the picture of what your life could look like. And here's how the chart also gives us information about, if you make a poor response to these energies, here's how it might also look, you know. There's ways, like each astrological sign has like optimal ways that it expresses or healthy ways that it expresses. And it also contains more shadowy, you could say, or less optimal ways that behavior tends to look when we're not making a good response to that sign. It's helpful, like, you know, like maybe just to use an example, like, is it okay to use your sun sign? I know what your sun sign is.
Sure. Yeah.
Sagittarius. So, you know, a very positive response to Sagittarius is that you kind of approach life like it's a great quest, you know. You're looking for meaning in life. That's what Sagittarius, that's the lifeblood of Sagittarius, is that it's on a quest for meaning, you know, to make meaning out of life's experiences. What you see when Sagittarius isn't in its healthy expression often is a kind of energetic where, a kind of grandiosity, like a kind of, I have all the answers, you know, I've you know, I'm like God, I've got the answers and you should listen to me, you know. That's what. And so knowing the chart doesn't dictate how we're going to respond to the chart. You know, one Sagittarian may be like on the quest, and another Sagittarian, and this is where it comes in, like how the various planets are relating to one another in the chart. That starts to add complexity. You know, how do we respond? Which planets are more challenged? Which ones do we have a harder time expressing? And which ones come easy to us? You know, and where are the impasses? Where do we get hung up? And where do we need to, you know, maybe Mars, which is about our ability to assert ourselves, maybe that planet is a little bit challenged or afflicted in our life. And so our Mars needs, you know, our conscious kind of intention or work. So I don't think necessarily that one session is going to enlighten a person. I don't think it's necessarily going to, I think it can very much affirm, you know, something for you. And I think that I love working with people over time, you know, and I have the kind of the blessing to be able to do that. Lori and I have a mentorship program, and I work with people over time, and I have their charts. So over time, I get to work with them and support them in understanding the energetics in their chart and aligning their life more closely with what's showing up in the chart. And it's a process, it's a relationship. It takes time to become people, you know. It takes time, and it's dynamic, so it's always changing. We're always growing.
For sure. Yeah. So if I'm understanding it correctly, it's essentially it's a tool for cultivating awareness of kind of patterns and you know, awareness of patterns and whatnot, and how life is unfolding, and then maybe bringing with that, you know, elevated awareness, we can maybe transcend patterns and be more conscious in the way that we are relating with the others, relating with the world, relating with our lives. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. I think that astrology is a tool to know yourself better, really. It's a tool to know yourself better.
Yeah.
And it's not the only tool, but it's a tool.
Right. And like we said, you know, knowing oneself better is really a foundational aspect to being healthy and well. You know, I think we agree on that, you know.
I think we definitely agree on that.
Yeah.
We definitely agree on that.
And another question surfaced when you're talking about working with people over time. And that's something that I, you know, genuinely don't really, I mean, I know that all the planets are, you know, continue to revolve and people continue to evolve, but someone's birth chart is like it's like those aspects are not changing. So can you speak
Right.
for a moment about like how it would be beneficial and how it would be in service to someone to have a continuously ongoing relationship
Yeah.
with?
Yeah, I can. Can I use a real life? I'd like to use just a real life example. It makes
Yeah,
it much
please.
more grounded
Please.
rather than it just be theoretical. So there's a woman in our mentorship who I've known now for 3 years. I won't get into the complexities of her entire chart, but I'll just share. She was born with the sun in Aries. Okay. Aries is the sign that's associated with here in the West with the spring equinox, so it's a fire sign, and it's in its healthy expression. It is not known for being bashful. It's kind of bold, it's active, it's pioneering, it wants to go somewhere and get something done. Aries, that's the nature of Aries. So it's ruled by the planet Mars, the god of war, the god that knows how to assert, and she also has Mars in the sign Aries. Okay, so she has Sun in Aries, Mars in Aries, two very kind of yang, expressive planets in a very yang, expressive sign. You're with me so far?
Mm-hmm.
And in her chart, both of those planets are located in the 10th house, which is an area of the chart that has to do with career, with work, with how we make a contribution to the community in the outer world. When I met this woman, she had started a business on the East Coast, but she was dissolving that business, and she was moving her family to Colorado. And it was a big life change. And she was feeling kind of, her Aries energy was toned way down. Like she didn't have access to it. She was kind of depressed, is maybe too strong a word, but she just was very lethargic in her life. She felt kind of lost. And when she relocated to Colorado, she didn't want to start the same business that she had had on the East Coast. She felt like she had done that. And that's another quality of Aries. It does something and then it wants to do something new. It doesn't have a lot of staying power. It's about starting things. Mm-hmm. So she, for the first 2 years that I knew her, she was in this very kind of like lethargic, unmotivated place. And I would look at her chart and I would see the Sun in Aries and the Mars in Aries, and I would think, wow, what's going on? What's going on with her? What's up? Like, what's it going to take for her to come into that sun sign again? And there was something going on by transit where the planets were moving that helped me to understand. Neptune was opposing her sun during this whole period. It was kind of watering down the Aries fire energy of her sun. Anyway, Neptune has moved on, and she met this very kind of Mars-like, Aries-like Martian guy out in Colorado. He's a neighbor. He's not a romantic, so she's married to another. But this guy has become like a kind of catalyst for her. He's like, he goes at life really hard in the way you would expect, an Aries to do. Anyway, it's inspired her, and she's gotten very clear about what she wants to do next in her life. She has a new idea for a new business, for an online platform, classes and it's related to her previous career, but it's new, and she's on fire about it. And all of a sudden, I'm working with her over time. I'm seeing this energy in her that I always knew was there, but had sort of gone dormant, coming back. and her Mars, and she's on fire to set up her platform and get her domain, and all of a sudden she's energized again. She's really excited about it. And there's some other funny stories, like she's wanting to learn how to use a chainsaw and cut down trees, and she wants to learn how to fire a gun. I mean, it's just fun, it's like fun stuff, because all those things would be very associated with a kind of healthy response to Mars. And she's finding that energy in herself, And so that's what I think the benefit of working with someone over time. Like 2 years ago, I thought to myself, what's wrong with her?
Mm-hmm.
And yet the chart gave me insight to understand that she was in a kind of period where she was revisioning her life. And she was very impatient with that process. Being in Aries, she felt like she needed to get back to work. And I kept telling her, just be patient.
Mm-hmm.
Let yourself be still. Let yourself just kind of chill out for a while. And when it's time, you'll know what you need to do. And now that time has come. So I think that's the benefit of working with people over time.
Yeah, and I love that story, and there's so many things that are important takeaways, I feel like, from that story. One of which maybe you could speak to for just a moment. You mentioned about like this Neptune transit, I think it was, watering down the Aries, and you were able to. It sounds like you were able to bring her awareness to this phase of life of recreation. And that
Revisioning. Revisioning her life.
And that, it sounds like that, encouraging her to be patient with that process. And it sounds like also maybe making sense of it astrologically. You were able to say, hey, like this might be like this Neptune planet going around or whatever might be leading to these feelings, and having that kind of, like we were talking about, that affirmative sense from our astrological chart, gave her a sense of like peace and like, okay, I can wait it out. I can see it completing its transit, and then I'll be recharged. So it kind of, I don't know if I'm trying to point at like a placebo effect element as well. Like, okay, like I can, it's obviously more than that, but it's information to the body to like, be patient, like just
to the body and to the mind. I think because we could track the movement of Neptune, we know how quickly Neptune is moving. We can track it through, and it's a book called An Ephemeris that tracks the movement of the planets through the signs. We know roughly how long it's going to be in the vicinity in that part of her chart where it's making that 180 degree or opposition to her sun. We because we know that, we can know when it's going to end. And giving her that information, what it does is I think what it does is it gives her a larger framework within which to understand what's happening in her life. And the larger framework helps a little bit for her to be more patient with the process.
I'm just imagining, me being in her.
Sense.
I'm imagining me being in her position or something. And, maybe some well-intentioned friend says like, hey, Ben, like, be patient, relax. Like, it's just a phase of life. Chill out. Everything, the light, everything will come together. And I'll be like, like whatever. And then if I have a session with you who's like looking at this piece of paper, like looking at it all, kind of organized astrologically, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, like, and then you're saying, okay, relax. Like, this is why you're making sense of it all.
Right.
And that, it's amazing how for so many of us that brings a lot of peace and relaxation. It kind of just allows people to surrender and let go of the attachment of how things ought to be and just
Right.
allow it to unfold. And that,
Yeah.
yeah, there's no doubt that that is one real important aspect of health, which is just um, surrendering and allowing things to be, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it isn't like surrendering, but even like knowing, like if we're under a Neptune transit from an astrological point of view, Neptune gives us a kind of set of recommendations for how we might maneuver our way through that period in our life constructively or usefully or productively, you know. And
Got it.
Neptune's instructions are: slow down, let yourself meditate, space out, take long walks at the beach. You know, that's Neptune's energetic says that those activities are actually going to be productive when you're under a Neptune time in your life.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that may be that may go very against your essential nature. You know, you might
Yeah.
not be a person who's inclined to live that way. But when we
Yeah.
see Neptune really active at a particular time in the chart, you know, I would make that recommendation. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out to me, because I think I just had a blind spot myself, in the sense that sometimes I feel, you know, like back to this, you know, example, like, okay, I'm kind of in a lull, it seems. I'm just going to kind of wait it out passively. I'm just going to wait it out passively. But what I'm hearing you say is that in the passive waiting out, there is actually further action that can be taken that is
Right.
feeding me and being, you
Yeah.
know, and allowing it to be healthfully expressed.
Yeah. It's like a paradox, but we can
Yeah.
actively participate in that more passive approach to our life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in doing that, we can trust that there's probably going to be something useful in that activity, you know? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 Well, that's a really good takeaway for me, and hopefully,
And it's
yeah.
often hard to see that when you're in the midst of it. But if you look back at your life and if you look back at the transits astrologically that were happening at a given period, and then you look back at what you were going through at that time, you know, the quality of what you were going through will often be very resonant or vibrationally with the energetic of the planet that was impacting your chart at that time. There's like you'll see that, but it's
Mhm.
hard when you're in the midst of it, you know. In the midst of it, when we're in the midst of change and we're in the midst of growth, we just feel like we're kind of wrestling our way through it, you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, you know, a good, like I said again, a real takeaway for me is, in the midst of that wrestling, it can be really helpful to look at the chart with some trained eyes,
Yeah.
hopefully.
And most of the times when people call me for a session, it's because something's up. You know,
Oh, okay.
they're thinking of leaving their job, they're thinking of getting married or leaving a marriage, you know, some big life event, some transition, or they're just feeling really lost. They don't know who they are, what they should do. Oftentimes, you know, it's
Mhm.
not, you know, sometimes people just love astrology and they say, well, I want to check in on a regular basis and see like what the planets are doing, and I want to
Mhm.
get information. But usually it's because there's some kind of crisis or transition in a person's life.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, when I reached out, that wasn't the case for me. I was gifted a session with you, and it was kind of like, oh, this will be fun.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I can, you know, relate in, you know, as a doctor, like that's certainly when people go to the doctors, like something's up, fix it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Something's up, fix it.
Right.
Um, so yeah, the way that it sounds like the way that you're fixing things. I mean, obviously you're not fixed I'm not fixing either. The
Yeah.
fixing is happening,
Good,
but
good point.
yeah, but the way that you fix is just like bringing people's awareness to the pattern, which is such a, I mean, I love it so much because it happens
That's a,
inside. It's like it's an insight for each client.
yeah,
It's not a pill or a supplement or a potion.
yeah,
It's like an
yeah.
insight.
That's a beautiful way how you just said it. Like
Yeah.
it gives us insight into our patterns,
Mhm.
and it gives us insight into how those patterns might change, grow, evolve throughout our life,
Mhm.
and how they might be asking us to change, grow, and evolve.
Mhm.
Yeah, it gives us insight. It
Yeah,
sparks something. Yeah,
for sure.
In, insight's a great tool. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And once again, I feel like I've said it like 5 or 6 times at least today already, that, you know, it's hard to gain insight when we have our blind spots and when we're wrestling with stuff. So taking
Right.
a breath, taking a step back, calling up the astrologer,
Yeah.
relaxing, and just, changing the perspective through which we're looking at things is
Yeah.
can be powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all relationships do that, right? You know, all relationships do that.
Mm.
You talk to a friend, but the beautiful thing about talking to, say, somebody who's trained in naturopathy or astrology is like we have a tool that we can use. We have information, we have knowledge that adds another layer of insight. So,
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I guess we're kind of wrapping things up here. But let's see, any last tidbits for anyone who kind of maybe the first thing for anyone wanting to study more or dive into, you know, themselves studying astrology, beyond reaching out to talk with someone like you, but for like a self-study sort of resource or reference, any recommendation?
Wow,
Yeah.
there's so much online astrology now. There's so much you can learn. There's a astrology university. Tony Howard's running this astrology university. You can Google that. There's a school based in England called the Mercury um, Internet School of Psychological Astrology,
Hmm.
MISPA, MISPA for short. I did a 2-year program with them. I'm just in the midst of doing their diploma requirements now. And there's just endless books. I always recommend, Stephen Forrest. He's wonderful. He has tremendous resources at his website to, see CDs, audio files, and videos. You could really teach yourself astrology by using his site. He also has an apprenticeship program. And his book, The Inner Sky, the first book he wrote, I always recommend it to people as a kind of starting place.
Yeah.
If you
I've
want to work with
picked up a
if you want
copy.
to
Yeah.
work with your own chart. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then my site, I love, I've worked with people who are wanting to learn astrology more and worked with them over time, just sort of coaching them and mentoring them. So mine and Lori's site is anewpossibility.com. And there's lots of information there as well.
Great. Yeah, look forward to putting all these resources. I'll post them for people to
Great.
click on
Great.
websites and whatnot.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Let me know if you need.
any other places where people can reach you, or is a new possibility kind of the
That's
best
probably
contact?
the easiest.
Okay.
We also have a page on Facebook. If you just go to Facebook and look up A New Possibility, our page will come up there. My email is benjamin@anewpossibility.com. So any of
Cool.
those ways. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. All right. Maybe you'll have some new astrology sessions in the books from the interview here.
That'd be fun. Yeah, that would
Couldn't
be fun.
recommend. Yeah, couldn't recommend you enough as a an astrology guide. So
And thanks, Ben, for the work you're doing.
yeah, a
You and
pleasure.
Suzanne, it's exciting. Yeah, it's great.
All right. Well, peace and love to all of you listeners. Until next time. Thank you, Benjamin.